The valet at the front of the restaurant, a towering structure of glass and steel in the heart of Atlanta, stared at the rusted hood of my 2006 pickup truck. I handed him the keys, and he held them by the very edge, as if the metal might infect his white gloves. I did not say a word to him. I simply adjusted the collar of my faded canvas work jacket and walked through the heavy glass doors. The air inside smelled like money. It smelled like truffles and aged wine and the kind of leather that cost more than a starter home. The hostess looked me up and down. Her eyes snagged on my scuffed boots and then moved to my weather-beaten face. "Name for the reservation," she asked with a tone so flat it could have leveled a building. "Reginald," I said quietly. "I am here for the table under the name Desmond." She led me through the dimly lit dining room. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen rain. People in tailored suits and silk dresses turned their heads to watch me pass. They saw an old black man in a worn-out jacket. They saw a blue-collar worker who had somehow wandered into the wrong world. I let them look. I reached the corner booth. Desmond and his wife Yvonne were already seated holding crystal glasses of champagne. My daughter Kendra sat across from them looking beautiful but tense. Next to her was her husband Terrence, the brilliant young executive, the man I had secretly placed at the head of my own empire. "Look who finally decided to join us," Desmond announced. His voice was loud, carrying across the quiet room. He wore a suit that probably cost 3 months of a teacher's salary. His gold watch caught the light from the chandelier overhead. Yvonne let out a soft, rehearsed laugh. She placed her manicured hand over her pearl necklace. "We were beginning to think your truck broke down again, Reginald," she said with a smile that did not reach her cold eyes. "It is such a long drive from your little neighborhood." I slid into the booth next to Kendra. She reached under the table and squeezed my rough hand. "I'm right on time," I said. I looked at Terrence. He shifted in his seat, suddenly deeply interested in the linen napkin on his lap. He was a smart boy, a good CEO, but tonight he was just a son caught in his parents' twisted game. "Good evening, Terrence," I said. He looked up and gave a tight nod. "Glad you could make it, Reginald," he replied softly. Desmond leaned forward, resting his elbows on the imported marble table. He looked at my canvas jacket and then at his son. "Terrence," he started with a voice full of false pity. "Did you not tell your father-in-law about the dress code? This is an exclusive establishment. They do not usually allow construction gear in the main dining room." I felt Kendra tense beside me. "Dad works hard with his hands, Desmond," she said sharply. "His jacket is perfectly fine." Yvonne sighed dramatically and picked up her menu. "Oh, sweetheart, we know he works hard," she cooed. "We just want him to feel comfortable. It must be so intimidating, Reginald, to be in a place like this." "Do you need me to explain the menu to you?" "It is entirely in French. They have a lovely roasted chicken if you prefer something simple." I poured myself a glass of still water from the carafe on the table. I did not look at the menu. I did not need to. I owned the commercial real estate company that leased this very building to the restaurant owner. I could have bought the entire kitchen staff with pocket change, but I stayed silent. I let them show me exactly who they were. "I prefer my food simple, Yvonne," I said calmly, taking a slow sip of my water. Desmond snorted and waved over a waiter. The waiter arrived immediately, practically bowing. "We will take the seafood tower to start," Desmond ordered. "And bring another bottle of the reserve vintage. Put it all on my tab." He looked directly at me. "Do not worry about the bill, Reginald. We are more than happy to treat you. We know things are tight for people on a fixed income." I set my glass down. The ice clinked against the crystal. The sound was sharp in the sudden quiet of our table. "I do not worry about bills, Desmond," I replied. My voice was low and steady. "I worry about the character of the people sitting across from me." Desmond narrowed his eyes. The fake smile dropped from his face for a split second. He adjusted his silk tie, pulling it tighter around his thick neck. "Character is built by success, Reginald," he said. "It is built by making something of yourself. Not by digging in the dirt for 30 years and having nothing to show for it but a dirty jacket and a rusty truck. My son here runs one of the biggest logistics companies in the state. He is a CEO. He understands the value of legacy. Is that not right, Terrence?" Terrence looked trapped. He opened his mouth but closed it again. He looked at Kendra and then at me. His silence was loud. He did not know that the legacy he was supposedly building belonged entirely to the man sitting across from him in the faded work clothes. "You are right about one thing, Desmond," I said, leaning back against the leather booth. "Legacy is important. But legacy is not what you wear. It is what you build. And sometimes the people with the loudest clothes have built nothing but a house of cards." Yvonne gasped softly, pretending to be offended. "Well, I never," she muttered. Desmond slammed his open palm on the table. The silverware rattled. The nearby tables turned to look at us again. "Listen to me, old man," Desmond hissed, dropping the polite act entirely. "You are only sitting at this table because my son was charitable enough to marry your daughter. You bring nothing to this family. You are a relic. A broke, tired relic. And tonight we are going to fix a mistake from the past." He reached into the inside pocket of his expensive suit jacket. He moved with the slow, deliberate confidence of a man who believes he has already won the war. He pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope and placed it on the marble table between us. The envelope sat there looking completely out of place next to the sparkling crystal and the fine china. It looked heavy. It looked like a threat. I stared at the blank front of it. I did not reach for it. I let the silence stretch out long and uncomfortable. Desmond wanted me to panic. He wanted me to ask what it was. He wanted the power. "You know?" Reginald Desmond continued, leaning back with a smug expression. "The problem with living a small life is that you forget that the world is very small too. People talk. Secrets have a way of digging themselves out of the dirt no matter how deep you bury them." I kept my hands folded in my lap. I watched a drop of condensation slide down the side of my water glass. "What is in the envelope?" Desmond Kendra asked. Her voice was trembling with a mixture of anger and confusion. Terrence reached out and touched his father's arm. "Dad," he said warningly, "not here. You said we were just going to talk." Desmond ignored his son. He kept his eyes locked on mine. His gaze was full of a bitter, ancient hatred that I immediately recognized. It was the same look his older brother Calvin used to give me right before he tried to steal my company 3 decades ago. I breathed in slowly, smelling the rich food and the expensive perfume around me. I felt the familiar cold calm settling over my mind. The kind of calm that only comes when a long-awaited battle has finally begun. Yvonne picked up her champagne flute, holding it by the delicate stem. She took a sip and smiled over the rim at my daughter. "Kendra, darling, you really should eat something before you get too upset," she said sweetly. "We only want what is best for everyone. We want to clear the air. We want to make sure the past is settled before Terrence moves further up in his career. A CEO cannot have shady family connections dragging him down." Kendra glared at her mother-in-law. "My father is the most honest man I know," she stated firmly. Yvonne chuckled, a dry rasping sound. "Honesty is such a subjective word," she replied. I finally reached out and placed my hand flat on the table right next to the cream-colored envelope. My calloused, scarred fingers contrasted sharply with the smooth marble. I looked at Desmond. He was practically vibrating with anticipation. He was waiting for me to tear it open to read the papers to beg for mercy. He was waiting for a victory he had not earned. Desmond tapped the envelope with his thick index finger. Go ahead, Reginald, he urged with a sick smile. Open it. See what 30 years of running from the truth looks like. I kept my hand perfectly still. I did not need to read the papers to know what lies they contained. What is your price, Desmond? I asked, keeping my voice dangerously low. Yvonne leaned in, her eyes shining with greed. It is not a price, Reginald, she corrected smoothly. It is restitution. For what you stole from Calvin. For driving him into an early broken grave. We want $2 million transferred to our offshore trust by Monday morning. If you refuse, these documents go to the press and to the board of directors at Terrence's company. We will expose you as a fraud and a thief. I looked at Terrence. He was staring at his plate, refusing to meet my eyes. He was a good CEO, but he was a weak son. He had let them poison him. He actually believed their fabricated story. Terrence, I said softly, do you believe this garbage? Terrence finally looked up, his face pale and conflicted. Dad showed me the records, Reginald, he stammered. I know you and Uncle Calvin had a business dispute. I know things got ugly. Dad just wants to settle the family debt quietly. He says it is the only way to protect the company and to protect Kendra. Kendra gasped, pulling her hand away from Terrence. Protect me, she echoed, her voice rising in disbelief. Are you extorting my father, Terrence? Are you out of your mind? He does not have $2 million. He drives a truck from 2006. Desmond laughed, a loud, booming sound that echoed off the crystal chandeliers. Oh, Kendra, my sweet, naive girl, Desmond mocked. Your father might dress like a beggar, but he has a pension. He owns that little house free and clear. He has a life insurance policy. We did our homework. He will liquidate everything he has, or I will make sure he spends his final years in a federal prison and your husband loses his CEO title in the fallout. The threat hung in the air, heavy and toxic. Yvonne picked up her fork and calmly took a bite of her salad. The seafood tower arrived, a towering structure of crushed ice and expensive lobster, but nobody looked at it. The waiter sensed the tension and quickly backed away. I looked at the cream-colored envelope one last time. It was a pathetic, desperate trap. They thought they had cornered an old, helpless man. They thought they were holding all the cards at a table they had rigged. They did not know that I owned the table, the restaurant, and the ground it was built on. I slid my hand away from the envelope. I placed both hands on the table and slowly pushed myself up. My joints popped slightly, but my posture was straight and unbroken. Where are you going? Desmond demanded, his smile faltering. We are not done here, Reginald. You need to sign the acknowledgement of debt. I looked down at him from my full height. You are right, Desmond, I said, my voice cutting through the ambient noise of the dining room like a blade. We are not done, but this conversation is over. Reginald, do not walk away from this. Yvonne warned, her voice losing its sweet edge. We will ruin you. I turned my eyes to Terrence. You are a smart boy, Terrence, I said quietly. But tonight you have made the biggest mistake of your professional career. You should have vetted your sources. Terrence looked confused, his brow furrowed in sudden panic. What do you mean? He asked, half rising from his chair. I did not answer him. I looked at Kendra. I love you, baby girl, I said gently. Call me when you get home. I will handle this. Kendra nodded, tears welling in her eyes, but she stayed seated. She knew my tone. She knew when to let me work. I turned my back on the table. I did not look over my shoulder. I walked through the dining room, my heavy work boots thudding against the polished hardwood floors. The rich patrons stared again, but this time I did not care. The air of the restaurant felt suffocating, filled with the stench of unearned arrogance and petty greed. I pushed through the heavy glass doors and stepped out into the cool, humid Atlanta night. The city lights blurred in the distance, a sea of glowing amber and bright neon. The valet rushed forward, holding my keys out like they were radioactive. I snatched them from his hand and tossed him a crumpled $20 bill. "Keep the change," I muttered. I walked over to my rusted 2006 truck. The passenger side mirror was still cracked, a jagged line reflecting the street lamps. I unlocked the heavy door and climbed into the worn driver's seat. The smell of old leather and motor oil grounded me. It reminded me of where I came from and exactly what it took to build my empire from the dirt up. I pulled my old heavy smartphone from the pocket of my canvas jacket. The screen was cracked, but it worked perfectly. I scrolled through my contacts, bypassing the family numbers, bypassing the casual friends. I stopped on a name that had no picture, just a single initial: Marcus. The most ruthless, high-powered corporate attorney in the entire state of Georgia. I tapped the dial button. The phone rang twice. "Yes, boss." A crisp, sharp voice answered on the other end. No pleasantries, no small talk. Marcus knew that if I was calling at 8 o'clock on a Friday night, the sky was falling. "Marcus," I said, staring out through the dusty windshield at the towering glass skyscrapers I owned. Desmond and Yvonne just made their move. They brought out the forged papers. They tried to extort me at dinner with Terrence sitting right there. There was a brief cold silence on the phone, then the sound of a heavy file being pulled open. "I understand," Marcus said softly. "What are your orders?" I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning ash gray in the dark cabin. "They want to play a game of wealth," I said, my voice hard and devoid of any mercy. "Let us show them what real wealth looks like. Call the holding company, contact the banks. Strip every shell corporation attached to Desmond's name. Cancel the credit lines, revoke the leases, and freeze the accounts. Consider it done." Marcus replied, his pen scratching rapidly across a legal pad. "Anything else, sir?" "Yes," I said, turning the key in the ignition. The old engine roared to life, a deep, rumbling growl that shook the chassis. "Initiate the freeze. Leave them with absolutely nothing by morning." I ended the call. I threw the phone onto the passenger seat. I shifted the truck into gear and pulled out of the valet lane, leaving the glowing restaurant and my greedy in-laws far behind in the rear-view mirror. The dominoes had just been pushed, and by sunrise their entire fake luxurious world was going to come crashing down on their heads. The sun came up over Atlanta hot and bright. I was already awake, standing in my small backyard. The dew was still wet on the grass and the air smelled like damp earth. I held a green plastic watering can, pouring a steady stream of water over my tomato plants. My cracked leather boots sank slightly into the mud. It was a quiet morning, the kind of morning I loved. I listened to the birds chirping in the oak tree, feeling completely at peace. I knew exactly what was happening on the other side of the city. I'd set the gears in motion, and there was no stopping them now. Miles away in the affluent suburbs of Buckhead, Desmond and Yvonne were waking up in their massive, heavily mortgaged mansion. They probably slept like babies, dreaming of my $2 million. They got dressed in their designer golf clothes, preparing for their regular Saturday morning routine. They drove their leased silver Bentley to the most exclusive country club in the state. They walked through the grand oak doors, acting like they owned the place. They greeted the staff by their first names, expecting the usual bowing and scraping. Desmond sat on the sunlit patio overlooking the pristine green of the 18th hole. He ordered a massive breakfast, an expensive imported coffee, and a bottle of vintage champagne. Yvonne sat across from him, adjusting her oversized sunglasses, gossiping about the other wealthy wives. They were celebrating a victory that they had not actually won. After 2 hours of eating and drinking, Desmond signaled for the check. He snapped his fingers at the young waiter, a disrespectful gesture that always made my blood boil. The waiter rushed over, handing him the leather booklet. Desmond did not even look at the total. He casually pulled a heavy titanium black card from his slim leather wallet. He tossed it onto the little tray, waving the waiter away with the back of his hand. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Desmond checked his gold watch, his thick brow furrowing in irritation. He hated waiting. He thrived on instant gratification and immediate obedience. Finally, the young waiter returned. The boy's face was pale and he looked incredibly uncomfortable. He held the leather booklet in both hands, holding it out to Desmond like it was a live grenade. "I am so sorry, Mr. Desmond," the waiter stammered, his voice trembling slightly. "But your card has been declined." Desmond froze his coffee cup halfway to his mouth. He slowly lowered the cup, placing it onto the saucer with a sharp clink. He stared at the young man, his eyes narrowing into cold slits. "What did you just say to me?" he demanded, his voice dropping an octave. The waiter swallowed hard, looking around the patio nervously. "The machine declined the transaction, sir," the waiter repeated, lowering his voice. "It gave a code that says the account has been frozen by the issuing bank." Yvonne scoffed loudly, pulling her sunglasses down her nose. "Do not be ridiculous," she snapped at the boy. "Run it again. You obviously pressed the wrong button. Do you have any idea who my husband is?" The waiter took a step back, looking terrified. "I ran it 3 times, ma'am," he explained softly. "The manager even tried to override it on the main terminal. The account is completely locked." Desmond snatched his wallet from the table, his face turning a deep, angry shade of red. He pulled out 2 more premium credit cards and slammed them onto the tray. "Run these," he barked, his voice rising, drawing the attention of the surrounding tables. "And tell your manager that I will be having a word with the club president about this embarrassing incompetence." The waiter hurried away, practically running back into the clubhouse. Desmond sat back in his chair, breathing heavily, trying to maintain his arrogant posture. But the eyes of his wealthy peers were already on him. The whispers had started. In their world, a declined card was not just an inconvenience, it was a sign of weakness, a crack in the armor, a sudden smell of blood in the water. 5 minutes later, the club manager walked out onto the patio. He was a tall, stern man in a tailored suit carrying the leather booklet. He did not look apologetic. He walked straight to Desmond's table and placed the booklet down. "Mr. Desmond," the manager said, his tone crisp and strictly professional. "I am afraid all 3 of your cards have been declined. Furthermore, I have just received a notification from our accounting department. Your automatic monthly membership dues were returned this morning due to insufficient funds." Desmond stood up so fast his heavy iron chair scraped loudly against the stone patio. "That is impossible," he roared, completely losing his composure. "I have millions in those accounts. Call my bank right now. This is a massive error." "I cannot do that, sir," the manager replied smoothly, stepping back. "I must ask you to settle this bill with cash or another form of payment. If you cannot, I will have to ask you to leave the premises immediately, and your membership will be suspended pending a full review." Yvonne looked around in sheer panic. Her wealthy friends were openly staring now, covering their mouths, whispering behind their linen napkins. Desmond dug through his pockets, his hands shaking with sudden blinding rage. He had no cash. He never carried cash. He relied entirely on the plastic illusion of his wealth. "We are leaving," Desmond hissed, grabbing Yvonne's arm and pulling her up. "I will have my lawyers sue this entire establishment by the end of the day." They practically fled the patio, their faces burning with public humiliation. They walked fast, their heads down, rushing toward the valet stand. Desmond handed his ticket to the attendant, screaming at the man to bring his Bentley around immediately. They stood on the curb, surrounded by the judging eyes of the valet staff, waiting in agonizing silence. The Bentley arrived. Desmond threw himself into the driver's seat, slamming the door. Yvonne climbed in, burying her face in her hands. Desmond slammed his foot on the gas pedal, the powerful engine roaring as they sped out of the country club gates. He drove erratically, his mind spinning with confusion and rising panic. He pulled out his phone, dialing his personal banker, his wealth manager, his accountants. Every single call went straight to an automated voicemail stating the numbers were temporarily out of service. The freeze was absolute. The net had been pulled tight, and they were trapped inside it. They turned onto their private tree-lined street in Buckhead. Desmond sped toward their massive driveway, desperate to get inside to get to his secure home office. But as they rounded the final corner, Desmond slammed on the brakes. The Bentley skidded to a sudden, violent halt. Parked in front of their towering iron gates were two heavy-duty industrial tow trucks. Desmond threw the Bentley into park and jumped out of the car, leaving the door wide open. "What the hell is going on here?" he screamed, running up the driveway. A large man in a dirty mechanic shirt was currently attaching thick steel chains to the front axle of Desmond's prized sports car. Another worker was securing Yvonne's customized luxury SUV onto the flatbed of the second truck. "Hey," Desmond yelled, waving his arms frantically. "Stop what you are doing. Those are my vehicles. Get your filthy hands off my property." The large man wiped grease from his forehead, looking at Desmond with absolute boredom. "You, Desmond?" the man asked, pulling a crumpled piece of paper from his front pocket. "Yes, I am Desmond," he shouted, his face purple with rage. "And I am calling the police. You are stealing my cars." The man chuckled, a rough grating sound. "Not stealing, buddy," he said lazily. "Repossessing." He shoved the crumpled paper hard into Desmond's chest. "Read it and weep, pal. The holding company that owns your lease just pulled the plug. They canceled the contracts at 6 a.m. this morning. They said you are in default." Desmond stared at the paper. It was a standard repossession order, completely legal and terrifyingly fast. He looked at the company name printed at the top of the page. It was a subsidiary, a small holding firm that he did not recognize. But I knew the name. It was one of my companies. "You cannot do this," Yvonne wailed, stumbling out of the Bentley, her high heels catching on the driveway. "How am I supposed to get to my charity luncheon?" The tow truck driver climbed into his cab, ignoring her completely. He honked his loud horn once, signaling his partner. "Take it up with the bank lady," he shouted out the window. Desmond stood frozen on his own driveway. He watched in absolute horror as the heavy diesel engines roared. The two trucks slowly pulled away, dragging his shiny, expensive trophies down the street and out of sight. The illusion of his power was being towed away in broad daylight. The debt spiral had officially begun, and he had no idea how deep the bottom really was. Desmond watched the tow trucks disappear down the street, feeling the cold grip of panic tighten around his throat. He spun around, grabbing Yvonne by the arm. "Get inside the house," he ordered, his voice cracking. "Do not answer the door for anyone. I'm going to the bank." He jumped back into the driver's seat of the Bentley, the only vehicle they had left, and sped down the driveway. He drove like a madman, weaving through the morning Atlanta traffic, his hands gripping the leather steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. He pulled up to the downtown branch of his private wealth management bank, parking illegally in the red zone. He did not care about parking tickets or the laws meant for ordinary people. He stormed through the heavy glass doors, bypassing the regular tellers, and marched straight toward the mahogany offices in the back. He ignored the receptionist who called out after him in surprise. He pushed open the heavy oak door of his personal banker, a man named Sterling, who had kissed Desmond's ring for the last 10 years. Sterling was sitting at his large desk, but he did not stand up to greet his client. There was no warm smile, no firm handshake, no offer of expensive sparkling water. Sterling looked at Desmond with the cold, detached expression of an undertaker preparing a body. "What the hell is going on with my accounts?" Sterling, Desmond demanded, slamming his hands down on the polished wood desk. "My black cards are frozen. My wife's cars were just repossessed from my own driveway. I want this fixed right now, or I am moving my entire financial portfolio to a competitor before lunch." Sterling did not flinch, and he did not apologize. He slowly opened his top drawer and pulled out a thick stack of legal notices bound together with a heavy rubber band. He placed the stack on the desk, pushing it toward Desmond with a single finger. "I'm afraid you have no portfolio left to move," Mr. Desmond, Sterling said quietly. Desmond stared at the stack of papers, his heavy breathing growing shallow in his chest. "What are you talking about?" he whispered, the loud anger suddenly draining from his voice, replaced by pure freezing terror. Sterling leaned back in his leather executive chair, folding his manicured hands together. "At exactly 6:00 this morning, we received a barrage of legally binding directives." Sterling explained, his tone completely flat. "Every single shell company, every consulting firm, and every offshore trust registered to your name was systematically dismantled by a hostile creditor. Your massive credit lines were called in effective immediately. The holding companies that backed your extravagant lifestyle claimed multiple severe breaches of contract." Desmond felt his legs give out beneath him. He slumped into the leather guest chair, his mouth hanging slightly open. Claim breach of contract, he repeated, his mind spinning out of control. By who? Who has the power to do that to all my secure accounts at once? Sterling tapped the top of the legal stack. "A massive corporate entity," he replied. "An anonymous parent company that quietly acquired all of your outstanding debts over the last 5 years. They own the paper on your mortgage, your risky business loans, and your luxury vehicle leases. And early this morning they decided to collect everything you owe them all at once." Desmond grabbed the thick stack of papers, his hands shaking violently. He flipped through the dense legal jargon, his panicked eyes scanning for a name for a target he could somehow fight. He found the final signature page. He read the name of the massive logistics conglomerate printed in bold black ink. His heart completely stopped in his chest. "This is a mistake," Desmond gasped, dropping the papers onto his lap like they were burning his skin. "This is the company my son runs. Terrence is the CEO of this exact logistics conglomerate. Why would his own company systematically destroy my finances behind my back?" Sterling sighed, a sound completely devoid of any human sympathy. "I cannot speak to your complicated family dynamics, Mr. Desmond," he said coldly. "But the directive did not come from the CEO. It came from the absolute top. It came from the sole owner of the parent company, an owner who apparently prefers to remain completely anonymous and holds absolute dictatorial control over the entire executive board. Your son might be the handsome public face, but whoever pulled this trigger owns the entire gun." Desmond sat paralyzed in the chair, the terrifying reality crashing down on his shoulders. The fake, glittering empire he had spent decades building had been wiped out in a matter of hours. He had no cash, no credit, and very soon he would have no mansion to live in. He thought about the tense dinner last night. He thought about the old quiet man in the faded work jacket, drinking a simple glass of water, walking away from the table without a single word of protest. He thought about the single phone call Reginald had walked outside to make. A cold, sick sweat broke out across Desmond's forehead. He realized with a sickening drop in his stomach that he had foolishly picked a fight with a ghost. A very powerful, very angry ghost who could strip a man to the bone without ever leaving a fingerprint. "Mr. Desmond Sterling," said loudly, breaking the heavy, suffocating silence in the room. "I must ask you to leave my office right now. Your remaining accounts are officially flagged for fraudulent activity. This bank is legally required to sever all ties with you. Building security will escort you out." Desmond did not argue. He could not find his voice to scream anymore. He slowly stood up, the legal papers slipping from his lap and scattering across the expensive carpet. He turned around and walked out of the office, his broad shoulders slumped, his arrogant posture completely broken. The tall armed security guard shadowed him closely all the way to the front glass doors. He stumbled out onto the busy sidewalk, the bright Atlanta sun blinding his eyes. He desperately looked around for his silver Bentley, the very last piece of his wealthy facade. But the red parking zone was completely empty. A single crumpled parking citation fluttered lightly on the concrete right where he had left his expensive car. Even the Bentley had been towed away while he was inside begging for mercy. Desmond stood alone on the bustling street corner, a supposedly wealthy man with absolutely nothing left but the expensive suit on his back and the crushing weight of his own terrible mistakes. Desmond had to walk 4 miles in his expensive leather shoes. The harsh Atlanta sun beat down heavily on his shoulders. He could not call an expensive black car, and he certainly could not hail a regular taxi with frozen accounts and zero cash. He finally reached the towering iron gates of his Buckhead mansion, sweating completely through his tailored silk shirt. The heavy gates were locked wide open. A massive industrial moving truck was backed straight up to his grand double doors. Men in gray uniforms were walking in and out, carrying the imported Italian sofas and the expensive modern art that used to hang in his foyer. Desmond ran up the wide brick driveway, his chest heaving with exhaustion. He yelled, his voice cracking with panic. "What are you doing in my house?" "Put my things down." A large man with a metal clipboard did not even look up from his paperwork. "Court order, buddy," the man said flatly. "The corporate leasing company is repossessing the staging furniture. You missed 3 massive balloon payments." Desmond pushed past the movers, stumbling blindly into his own grand hallway. The house echoed hollowly. It was being completely stripped bare. The beautiful illusion of his generational wealth was literally being packed into brown cardboard boxes. He heard a loud, piercing scream from the kitchen. It was Yvonne. He rushed down the hall, his leather shoes slipping on the hardwood floor. He found his wife sitting on a single cheap folding chair in the middle of their empty marble kitchen. Her expensive makeup was smeared down her cheeks, leaving dark tracks on her face. She was clutching her cell phone with both hands, her knuckles stark white. "They took the custom dining table, Desmond." She sobbed loudly, looking up at him with wild, terrified eyes. "They just walked right in and lifted the table straight out from under me." Desmond leaned heavily against the cold granite counter, trying to catch his breath. "The cars are gone too," he panted, wiping the thick sweat from his forehead. "The bank froze absolutely everything, Yvonne. We are completely locked out of our own lives." Yvonne stood up so fast she knocked the folding chair over. She dropped her phone onto the marble floor. It clattered loudly in the dead silence of the empty room. "My friends just kicked me out of the charity gala group chat," she screamed, her voice echoing shrilly off the bare walls. "The country club president called me personally on my cell. He said my membership was publicly revoked for severe non-payment. I am a laughing stock, Desmond." Susan literally hung up the phone on me. Desmond rubbed his temples, a massive headache pounding violently behind his eyes. "Shut up about your stupid socialite friends, Yvonne." He snapped, his patience entirely gone. "We are losing the entire house. Do you understand me? The bank is calling in the multi-million-dollar mortgage today." Yvonne marched right up to him, her face twisting into a hideous mask of pure rage. She shoved him hard in the chest with both hands. "This is your fault," she shrieked at the top of her lungs. "You told me the shell companies were bulletproof. You told me the offshore accounts were perfectly safe. You promised me that going after Reginald would make us rich. I did not know the old man actually had real power," Desmond roared back, the thick veins in his neck bulging under his skin. "He is a retired blue-collar worker. He drives a rusty trash truck. How was I supposed to know he had the high-level connections to freeze a private wealth account? He does not just have connections, you absolute idiot, Yvonne spat back, her voice dripping with venom. The holding company repossessing our furniture right now is a direct subsidiary of Terrence's logistics conglomerate. Your own son is destroying us. He chose that little ghetto princess Kendra over his own flesh and blood. Desmond paced frantically across the empty kitchen, his expensive shoes echoing loudly. Terrence did not do this, he muttered, sheer panic rising in his chest all over again. The bank manager specifically said it came from the very top. It came from the anonymous owner of the conglomerate. Yvonne laughed, a harsh, broken sound that lacked any real humor. Who cares who did it, Desmond? We are ruined. The life insurance policy on your dead brother Calvin ran out years ago. The elite investment funds were a total lie. You gambled it all away, trying to look like a king to people who do not even like you. And now the repo men are literally taking my designer clothes out of my closet. Do not put this all on me, Desmond yelled, pointing a shaking accusatory finger right at her face. You love the luxury cars. You love the expensive country club. You pushed me to shake down Reginald just as hard as I did. You wanted that $2 million to pay off your own secret credit card debts. They stood in the center of the massive, echoing kitchen, screaming viciously at each other. The polite, wealthy, sophisticated facade they wore at the restaurant was completely gone. They were just two desperate drowning people violently fighting over a rapidly sinking ship. The lead mover walked into the kitchen holding his metal clipboard. "Excuse me, folks," the mover said casually, completely unfazed by their vicious screaming match. "We are going to need the smart refrigerator now. The kitchen appliances are part of the original staging lease." Desmond looked at the board mover and then at the massive stainless steel refrigerator. He had absolutely nothing left to say. The fight drained right out of his body. He let out a pathetic, defeated sigh and stepped slowly aside. Yvonne collapsed back onto the floor, burying her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably into her lap. The movers quickly rolled a heavy steel dolly under the refrigerator and wheeled it away, leaving a large, dirty square on the pristine marble floor. Desmond slowly slid his back down the granite counter until he was sitting on the cold, hard floor. He pulled his knees tightly to his chest, staring blankly at the empty space where his fake luxury life used to be. The dominoes had fallen hard, crushing his entire empire into dust. But the absolute worst part was that he still did not realize who had actually pushed them. Across town, far away from the screaming matches in Buckhead, the air was cool and quiet. I drove my rusty 2006 truck right past the valet line of the tallest glass skyscraper in downtown Atlanta. The parking attendants did not stop me. They immediately moved the velvet ropes, letting my dented bumper slide into the exclusive executive parking bay. I killed the heavy engine and stepped out into the shadowed garage. I smoothed the collar of my faded canvas jacket and walked toward the private biometric elevator. I pressed my calloused thumb against the glowing glass scanner. The heavy steel doors slid open with a soft sigh. I stepped inside and the elevator shot upwards, leaving the noise of the city far below me. The doors chimed, opening onto the 75th floor. The entire level was a fortress of polished obsidian and floor-to-ceiling glass. This was the true nerve center of my operations, the quiet heart of a logistics empire that spanned 14 states. Dozens of analysts in sharp suits moved quickly across the open floor. They did not look at my worn-out boots. They respectfully lowered their eyes as I walked past them. They knew exactly who signed their massive paychecks, and they knew better than to judge a book by its cover. I pushed open the heavy oak doors of my corner office. The room was vast, dominated by a massive mahogany desk and panoramic windows that looked down on the entire city. Standing by the glass waiting for me was a tall man in a dark charcoal suit. His name was Vance. He was my lead corporate investigator, an ex-military intelligence officer who specialized in burying my enemies. "Good morning, boss," Vance said smoothly, turning away from the window. He did not offer a handshake. We did not waste time on pleasantries. "Morning, Vance," I replied, walking over to the heavy leather chair behind my desk. I sat down, leaning back, letting the expensive leather conform to my tired shoulders. "Tell me the freeze was executed properly." "It was absolute." Vance confirmed, stepping closer to the desk. "Marcus and the legal team triggered the financial cascade at exactly 6 a.m. Desmond and Yvonne are completely locked out of the banking system. The holding companies pulled the luxury car leases, and the eviction process on the Buckhead property is currently in motion. They have 0 liquid assets and 0 available credit." "Good," I said quietly, looking out over the sprawling city skyline. Desmond thought he could weaponize his fake wealth against my family. I wanted him to feel the cold reality of actually having nothing to his name. Vance nodded, his face deadly serious. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick black security folder. He placed it directly in the center of my mahogany desk. "But there is a much larger problem," Reginald Vance stated, his voice dropping slightly. "Desmond is not just a greedy fool. He is a desperate, cornered animal." I looked at the solid black folder. I did not touch it yet. I let the silence hang in the large office, measuring the heavy gravity in Vance's voice. "What did you find?" I asked calmly. When we dismantled his offshore shell companies, Vance explained, pacing slowly across the thick carpet. "We did not just find empty accounts and bad investments. We found a massive, bleeding hole of illicit debt. Desmond has been playing a very dangerous game behind his wife's back for the last 3 years. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the polished wood. "Explain it to me," I ordered. Vance stopped pacing and looked me dead in the eye. "Desmond is a chronic degenerate gambler," Vance said bluntly. "He did not lose his fortune in the stock market. He lost it at underground tables and illegal sports books. And he did not just borrow from banks to cover his massive losses. He borrowed from the worst kind of people." I felt a cold, sharp spike of anger hit my chest. People like Desmond always thought they were untouchable until they owed money to men who did not care about designer suits or country club memberships. "Who does he owe?" I asked, my voice turning to ice. "He owes a criminal syndicate operating out of the port of Savannah," Vance revealed, gesturing toward the black folder. "The paper trail is messy, but the numbers are crystal clear. Desmond is currently $7 million in the red. The syndicate does not use debt collectors, Reginald. They use enforcers. And they are actively looking for him right now." I stared at the black folder, the pieces of the puzzle violently locking into place. This was never about his dead brother Calvin. This was never about family honor or settling an old score. The blackmail attempt at the restaurant, the $2 million demand, it was all a desperate scramble for survival. He was trying to use my money to stop a bullet. He thought he could extort me to pay off the mob, I said softly, the sheer audacity of it making my blood boil. He brought that kind of danger directly to the dinner table where my daughter was sitting. Vance nodded solemnly. "Yes, sir," he agreed. "And because we just froze all of his remaining public assets, the syndicate is going to know he is completely broke. They will not wait for their money anymore. The clock has officially run out." I stood up from my heavy leather chair and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window. I looked down at the tiny moving cars on the highway below. Desmond had invited a monster into his home, and now the monster was hungry. "Keep eyes on him, Vance," I commanded my reflection, staring back at me in the glass. "Track every move he makes. If he goes anywhere near Kendra or Terrence, I want your team to intervene immediately." "Understood, Boss," Vance replied firmly. "But what happens when the syndicate corners him?" I turned away from the window, my eyes narrowing into a hard, unforgiving stare. "Let them corner him," I said coldly. A man who builds a trap for his family deserves to feel the iron teeth snapping shut. Desmond walked aimlessly down the cracked sidewalk of a strip mall miles away from his empty mansion. He had taken a public bus, a humiliating experience that left him smelling of diesel fumes and stale sweat. His silk shirt was ruined, clinging to his back in the humid afternoon heat. He held a prepaid burner phone, his hands shaking violently as he dialed the last contact he had, a shady loan shark operating out of a pawn shop in East Atlanta. The phone rang and finally disconnected. Desmond let out a pathetic sob, dropping the plastic phone onto the concrete. He was entirely out of options. The sun was beginning to set, casting long, dark shadows across the empty parking garage behind the strip mall. He stumbled into the dim concrete structure, looking for a place to sit to just catch his breath and figure out how to survive the night. He leaned against a concrete pillar, sliding down until he was sitting on the dirty ground. He buried his face in his hands, crying silent, bitter tears. The echoing sound of heavy footsteps snapped his head up. 2 men were walking toward him, stepping out from the shadows of a parked delivery van. They did not look like bank managers or wealthy country club members. They wore plain, dark clothes that hid the bulk of their muscular frames. The taller man had a thick, jagged scar running down the side of his neck. The shorter man wore a heavy leather jacket despite the sweltering Georgia heat, and his eyes were completely dead void of any human emotion. Desmond scrambled backward, scraping his expensive leather shoes against the rough concrete floor. "Who are you?" he stammered, his voice echoing loudly in the empty garage. "What do you want?" The shorter man stopped a few feet away, pulling a silver steel lighter from his pocket. He flipped it open, the sharp metallic click ringing in the silence. "Desmond," the man said, his voice raspy and terrifyingly calm. "You are a very hard man to find today. I do not have any money on me." Desmond panicked, holding his empty hands up in surrender. "My accounts were frozen by a corporate glitch. I swear to you the bank is fixing it right now." The tall man with the scar chuckled a low, ugly sound. "Do not insult our intelligence, Desmond," he warned, stepping closer, towering over the pathetic figure on the ground. "We know about the repo trucks. We know about the eviction notice on the Buckhead property. We know your black cards are dead plastic. The glitch is not corporate, buddy. You are completely tapped out." Desmond felt his bladder threaten to let go. He pressed his back hard against the concrete pillar, realizing exactly who these men worked for. "You are from Savannah," he whispered, his face draining of all remaining color. The short man ignited the lighter, staring into the small yellow flame. "Our boss is extremely disappointed in you, Desmond," the short man said smoothly. "You borrowed $7 million from a syndicate that does not forgive and does not forget. You promised a massive return on investment from an offshore trust fund. But our accountants did some digging this morning. That trust fund does not exist. You lied to the wrong people. I can get the money." Desmond begged, his voice cracking into a high-pitched squeal. "I have a plan. My son is the CEO of a massive logistics empire. He has access to unlimited corporate funds. I just need a little more time to secure the transfer." The tall man suddenly reached down, grabbing Desmond by the collar of his ruined silk shirt. He hauled the heavy man to his feet with terrifying ease, slamming him brutally against the concrete pillar. Desmond gasped for air, his feet dangling inches off the ground. "Time is a luxury you can no longer afford." The tall man growled, his face inches away from Desmond's, terrified eyes. "The boss is done waiting for fake trust funds and empty promises." The short man snapped the lighter shut, stepping forward until he was shoulder to shoulder with his partner. "You have exactly 48 hours. Desmond, the short man stated coldly, delivering the absolute final sentence. 48 hours to deliver $7 million in untraceable cash or authorized digital bonds. I cannot do that in 2 days. Desmond sobbed, tears streaming freely down his face. "Please, I need a week." Just give me 1 week. The tall man tightened his grip, cutting off Desmond's air supply. If the money is not secured by Wednesday evening, the tall man whispered, his breath smelling like stale tobacco and old coffee. We are not going to break your legs, Desmond. We are going to visit your lovely wife, Yvonne. We know she is currently sitting in an empty house crying on the bare floor. And after we are done with her, we will pay a visit to your son Terrence and his pretty little wife Kendra. Desmond thrashed wildly, his eyes bulging in pure horror. Leave them out of this, he choked out, clawing desperately at the thick fingers around his throat. This is my debt. The short man smiled, a terrifying stretch of thin lips. It is a family debt now, Desmond. He corrected gently. 48 hours. Tick-tock. The tall man suddenly released his grip, letting Desmond crash heavily to the concrete floor. Desmond collapsed onto his hands and knees, coughing violently, gasping for the humid garage air. He looked up, his vision blurring with tears and terror, but the two men were already walking away, disappearing back into the dark shadows of the parking structure. Desmond was left completely alone, trembling on the dirty ground. The ultimatum was ringing in his ears, a deafening death sentence. He had 2 days to steal $7 million from the very son he had raised, or his entire family would be slaughtered. The arrogant, wealthy facade was entirely dead, leaving behind a desperate, cornered rat willing to commit any crime to escape the trap he had built for himself. Desmond dragged himself out of the dark parking garage, his mind racing with sheer terror. The threats from the syndicate enforcers echoed loudly in his ears. He had exactly 48 hours to find $7 million. He could not go back to his empty mansion, and he could not go to the police. The police could not stop a bullet from the mob, and they would lock him up for his massive financial frauds anyway. He walked for hours in the dark until his blistered feet bled inside his expensive leather shoes. He sat on a public bench, waiting for the sun to rise over the city. When Tuesday morning finally broke, Desmond had a desperate criminal plan. He knew he could not ask Terrence for a personal loan. Terrence did not have $7 million in liquid cash sitting around. But Terrence was the chief executive officer of a logistics conglomerate that moved billions of dollars a year. Terrence had access to massive corporate reserve accounts and international wire transfer codes. Desmond just needed to convince his son to look the other way for 5 minutes and authorize a single blind transfer. Desmond used the last few dollars on his prepaid card to buy a cheap generic dress shirt from a discount store. He threw his ruined silk shirt in a public trash can and washed his face in a gas station bathroom. He had to look like a man in a temporary bind, not a dead man walking. He walked to the towering glass and steel headquarters of Terrence's logistics company. It was the same building where my lead investigator Vance and I were currently operating on the 75th floor. Desmond walked through the massive, polished marble lobby, keeping his head down. He approached the front security desk, praying that Terrence had not revoked his family visitor pass yet. "Good morning, Desmond," Pund said, trying to force a confident smile. "I'm here to see my son Terrence. I am his father." The security guard checked the computer system, his face neutral. "You are cleared for the 50th floor executive suite, sir," the guard replied, handing over a temporary badge. "Go right on up." Desmond let out a massive breath of relief, gripping the plastic badge like it was a lifeline. He rode the high-speed elevator up his heart, hammering violently against his ribs. The doors opened onto the 50th floor, revealing a sprawling, ultra-modern office space. Administrative assistants typed rapidly on their computers, and junior executives walked the halls with thick tablets. It was a machine of absolute wealth, and Desmond desperately needed to steal a piece of it. He walked past the reception desk, ignoring the assistant who called out his name. He pushed open the heavy glass door to Terrence's private corner office. Terrence was standing behind his massive desk, staring out the window, holding a cup of black coffee. He looked exhausted. The bags under his eyes were dark, clear sign that the disastrous dinner at the restaurant had kept him awake all night. He turned around when the door opened, his face dropping in surprise and immediate frustration. "Dad," Terrence said, setting his coffee cup down on the desk. "What are you doing here? You cannot just barge into my office without an appointment. I have 3 board meetings this morning." Desmond quickly closed the heavy glass door behind him, making sure it clicked shut. He walked over to the desk, his hands trembling slightly. "Terrence, please," Desmond begged, dropping his voice to a desperate whisper. "I need your help. I have nowhere else to go." Terrence crossed his arms, leaning back against the edge of his desk. "You need my help," Terrence repeated, shaking his head in disbelief. "You humiliated my father-in-law at dinner. You tried to extort Kendra's family. And Yvonne called me at midnight screaming hysterically that your house was being repossessed and your accounts were frozen. What exactly is going on, Dad?" Desmond swallowed hard, his throat dry as bone. "It is a massive misunderstanding with the holding companies," Desmond lied, smoothly falling back on his old habits of deceit. "It is a temporary cash flow freeze, but it left me completely exposed, Terrence. I have an outstanding high-yield bridge loan that is being called in today." Terrence narrowed his eyes, clearly suspicious. "A bridge loan?" he asked slowly. "From who? Which bank is calling in a loan on a Tuesday morning without written notice?" "It is not a traditional bank," Desmond admitted, letting a perfectly calculated amount of panic leak into his voice. "It is a private equity syndicate. And they are playing hardball, Terrence. If I do not clear the balance in 48 hours, they are going to seize all of my remaining international assets. They will ruin me permanently. I just need a short-term corporate loan to bridge the gap until the freeze is lifted." Terrence pushed himself off the desk, his posture turning rigid and professional. "You want me to give you a corporate loan?" Terrence asked, his voice rising in anger. "Are you out of your mind? I am the CEO, not the owner. I answer to an anonymous executive board and a parent company that audits every single dime we move. I cannot authorize a personal loan to my own father. That is a massive conflict of interest. It does not have to be a personal loan on the books," Desmond pushed, stepping closer to his son, his eyes wild with desperation. "You manage the international logistics accounts. You have authorization for unverified vendor payments up to $10 million. You can wire the money to an offshore holding account. We label it as a supply chain advance. I will pay it back with full interest the second my accounts unfreeze. Nobody will ever know, Terrence." Terrence stared at his father, his mouth slightly open in absolute shock. He realized exactly what his father was asking him to do. "You are asking me to embezzle corporate funds," Terrence said, his voice dropping into a horrified whisper. "You are asking me to steal from the very company that trusted me to run it." Desmond grabbed Terrence's shoulders, digging his fingers into the expensive suit jacket. "I am asking you to save my life," Desmond hissed, completely losing his carefully crafted composure. "I am your father, Terrence. I raised you. I paid for your expensive business degrees. You owe me this. Just push the button on the wire transfer and look the other way." Terrence looked at the desperate, sweating man holding on to him. He saw the ruined discount shirt and the wild, panicked eyes. The arrogant, wealthy facade was entirely gone, leaving only a pathetic, dangerous criminal behind. Terrence stepped back violently, breaking his father's desperate grip on his suit jacket. He looked at Desmond not with the respect of a son, but with the cold, hard judgment of a corporate executive. "I am not going to do it, Dad," Terrence stated, his voice completely steady and devoid of any sympathy. "I'm not going to risk federal prison and the destruction of my entire career because you made a bad bet with a private equity firm." Desmond threw his hands up in the air, pacing frantically across the thick office carpet. "It is just a temporary transfer, Terrence," he pleaded, his voice cracking with panic. "You are the chief executive officer. You control the flow of billions of dollars. The board of directors will never even notice a minor supply chain advance. They are just a bunch of faceless rich investors. You are wrong about the board, Terrence fired back, walking over to his mahogany desk. And you are dead wrong about the owner of this company. They are ruthless, Dad. They audit every single transaction down to the last penny. If I authorize a blind wire transfer to an offshore account, they will flag it before the money even leaves the building. The anonymous owner fired the last executive for expensing a personal dinner. If I steal $7 million, they will destroy me, and they will throw me in a cage. Desmond wiped the thick, cold sweat from his forehead. He realized his son was not going to break. Terrence was a man of integrity, a man who actually believed in the rules that Desmond had spent his entire life breaking. But you are my son, Desmond whispered, playing his final pathetic emotional card. Are you really going to let these people ruin me over a corporate technicality? Terrence leaned his hands flat on the desk, looking his father dead in the eye. I'm not ruining you, Dad, he said quietly. You ruined yourself. You brought forged documents to a family dinner. You threatened my wife and her father, and now you come into my office and ask me to become a criminal. I love you, but I will not cross that line for you. Not for you, and not for anyone. Desmond felt a cold, dark fury rising in his chest, completely swallowing his panic. The entitled, arrogant monster inside of him flared back to life. He pointed a shaking finger at Terrence. You are going to regret this, Desmond hissed, his face twisting into an ugly sneer. When I lose everything, it will be on your head. You turned your back on your own blood. Get out of my office, Terrence commanded, pressing a small silver button on his desk intercom. If you ever come back here and ask me to steal from this company again, I will have security throw you out onto the street. Desmond did not say another word. He turned around and stormed out of the glass doors, his face burning with a mixture of profound shame and blinding rage. Up on the 75th floor, I sat quietly in my heavy leather chair. I watched the entire pathetic interaction play out in high definition on the secure security monitors mounted on my wall. I took a slow sip of my black coffee. Terrence had passed the ultimate test. He had chosen his integrity over his corrupt father. But I knew Desmond was not going to stop. A cornered rat does not just give up when the first door is locked. He was going to find another way to get that money, even if he had to burn the rest of the world down to get it. Down on the street, Desmond walked aimlessly, the midday sun beating down on him. The syndicate clock was ticking loudly in his head. Plan A was completely dead. He needed a plan B, and he needed it fast. His mind raced, calculating his remaining options. He had no friends left. He had no credit. But he did know one person who supposedly had a free and clear house, a solid pension, and a comprehensive life insurance policy. He thought about me. He thought about the quiet old man in the faded work jacket. He smiled a sick, twisted smile. If he could not steal from his powerful son, he was going to steal from the weakest target he could find. He pulled out his burner phone and dialed Yvonne. Find a ride, Desmond ordered, his voice cold and full of dangerous intent. We are going to pay a visit to Kendra's father. The old man is going to save our lives, whether he wants to or not. My lead investigator, Vance, did not just watch Desmond leave the corporate building. He had a dedicated surveillance team tracking my desperate-in-law through the humid Atlanta streets. Desmond did not know it, but every single frantic step he took was being recorded and transmitted directly to my 75th floor office. I sat behind my heavy mahogany desk, watching the live feed on my secure monitors as Desmond met up with Yvonne. She had managed to beg a ride from a distant cousin arriving in a beat-up sedan that smelled like old cigarettes. They did not look like the wealthy elite anymore. They looked like two drowning rats clinging to a sinking piece of driftwood. Desmond directed the car to a dilapidated strip mall on the extreme edge of the city limits. He walked into a dingy, dimly lit storefront that advertised cheap legal services and rapid bail bonds. The lawyer inside was a disgraced, disbarred scam artist named Silas. Silas was the kind of man who would sell his own mother for $100 bill. Desmond slammed his last remaining piece of jewelry, a heavy gold college ring, onto the scratched wooden desk. He demanded a very specific and highly illegal set of documents. I listened to the audio feed through the hidden microphone Vance had planted on Desmond's burner phone. Desmond was speaking fast, his voice dripping with venom and sheer panic. "I need a full medical conservatorship drawn up immediately," Desmond ordered, pacing the tiny office. "I need power of attorney, and I need a physician affidavit stating the target is suffering from severe advanced dementia." Silas examined the heavy gold ring under a cheap desk lamp. "That is federal fraud, buddy." Silas drawled, his voice raspy and unbothered. "Forging a medical evaluation and stealing an old man's estate carries a mandatory minimum sentence. I'm going to need a lot more than a tacky ring to risk a federal cell." Desmond slammed his hands on the desk, leaning right into the shady lawyer's face. "The target is an isolated blue-collar nobody." Desmond lied smoothly. "He lives in a cheap suburban house. He has a massive pension and a comprehensive life insurance policy that we can borrow against. Nobody's going to check the paperwork, Silas. You draw up the fake conservatorship and I will give you 20% of the liquid assets the second I drain his accounts." Silas smiled, a greasy, unsettling stretch of his lips. He pulled a thick stack of blank legal forms from his bottom drawer. He began to type furiously on an ancient desktop computer. I watched the entire criminal conspiracy unfold right from the comfort of my billionaire fortress. Desmond was legally documenting his own extortion plot. He was carefully crafting the exact weapon that I would eventually use to lock him away forever. It took Silas less than 2 hours to forge the comprehensive legal trap. The papers were incredibly thorough. They claimed that I, Reginald, was completely mentally incompetent. They stated that I could no longer manage my own finances, and that Desmond, as a concerned family member, was stepping in to protect my modest assets. The documents included a forged signature from a non-existent neurologist. The only thing missing was my actual signature on the voluntary surrender clause. Desmond snatched the thick manila envelope from the desk, his hands trembling with greedy anticipation. He walked back out to the hot parking lot where Yvonne was waiting in the sweltering car. He tossed the envelope into her lap, his eyes wild and fully committed to the crime. "We have the paperwork," Desmond panted, slamming the car door shut. "We are going to drive to Reginald's house right now. We are going to play nice. We are going to cry and beg for forgiveness for how we acted at the restaurant. We will tell him these papers are just standard non-disclosure agreements to protect Terrence from the corporate fallout. The old man is a simple, uneducated laborer. He will not read the fine print. He will sign anything to protect his precious daughter and her husband." Yvonne stared at the forged documents, a cruel, predatory smile slowly spreading across her tear-stained face. "And once he signs them," she whispered, her voice cold and hollow, "we take his house. We drain his pension. We take every single dime he has saved for the last 30 years, and we pay off the Savannah Syndicate." Desmond finished starting the car's engine. "We get our lives back, Yvonne. We just have to step over one old man to do it." Up in my glass tower, I pressed a silver button on my desk intercom. Vance walked into my office instantly, his face carved from stone. He had heard the entire conversation. He knew exactly where they were heading next. Boss Vance said quietly, "The surveillance team is in position around your suburban property. The interior cameras are rolling. The audio recorders are active. We have eyes on every single angle of the living room and the front porch. Should we intercept them before they reach the door?" I stood up slowly, picking up my faded canvas work jacket from the back of my chair. I slipped my arms into the worn sleeves, feeling the familiar, comfortable weight of the rough fabric. "No, Vance," I replied, my voice perfectly calm and chillingly deliberate. "Do not stop them. Let them walk right through my front door. Let them perform their sick little play. I walked past my massive mahogany desk, heading for the private elevator. "I'm going home," I said, looking Vance squarely in the eye. "It is time for me to play the helpless prey." I parked my 2006 truck in the driveway of my small brick house. The afternoon sun was hot, baking the concrete. I walked up the short path past my tomato plants and unlocked the front door. The house was quiet, smelling of old wood and lemon polish. It looked exactly like the modest home of a retired blue-collar worker. But hidden inside the smoke detectors and the picture frames were state-of-the-art 4K resolution cameras. I sat down in my worn-out recliner, leaving the front door unlocked. I waited. 10 minutes later, I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel outside. A car door slammed, followed by another. Heavy footsteps approached my porch. A loud, desperate knock echoed through the quiet house. I did not get up immediately. I let them wait, letting their anxiety build. I took a deep breath, dropping my shoulders and relaxing my face into an expression of mild confusion. I stood up slowly, making sure my knees popped loudly. I shuffled toward the door, dragging my feet just a little bit. I opened the door, blinking against the bright sunlight. Desmond and Yvonne stood on my porch. They looked terrible. The arrogant glow of the restaurant was completely gone. Desmond was wearing a cheap, wrinkled shirt, and Yvonne looked pale and exhausted. But as soon as they saw me, their faces twisted into masks of profound, fabricated sorrow. "Reginald," Yvonne cried out, her voice trembling with fake emotion. "Oh, Reginald, we are so incredibly sorry." She lunged forward, throwing her arms around my neck in a stiff, awkward hug. I stood perfectly still, letting her perform her little act. "What is going on?" I asked, keeping my voice shaky and uncertain. "Why are you here, Yvonne?" Desmond Mom stepped inside, closing the front door behind him. He looked around my modest living room, a flicker of greedy disgust crossing his eyes before he buried it under a fake, pathetic smile. "We came to apologize, Reginald," Desmond said, his voice thick with rehearsed grief. "We acted terribly at the restaurant. The stress of the business has completely broken us." I shuffled back to my recliner, lowering myself down with a heavy, tired sigh. I let my right hand tremble just slightly, resting it on the worn armrest. "Business stress," I repeated, looking at him with wide, confused eyes. "Did Terrence lose his job? Is my daughter okay?" Yvonne sat on the edge of my floral sofa, pulling a crumpled tissue from her purse. "Terrence is fine right now," she sniffled, dabbing at her dry eyes. "But he is in terrible danger, Reginald. The logistics company he runs is under a massive federal investigation. The board of directors is completely out of control. They are looking for a scapegoat, and they are trying to pin the blame on our son." I widened my eyes, leaning forward, playing the terrified father perfectly. "Federal investigation," I stammered, my voice cracking. "My Terrence. They cannot do that. He is a good boy. He works so hard." Desmond knelt down on the rug right next to my chair. He looked up at me, his eyes wide and pleading. "That is exactly why we are here, Reginald." Desmond lied smoothly, placing his heavy hand over my trembling one. "We need to protect him. We need to protect Kendra. The lawyers told us that the government is going to freeze all family assets connected to Terrence. They are going to take your house, Reginald. They will seize your pension and leave you out on the street." I gasped, a sharp, ragged sound, pulling my hand away from his. "My house," I whispered, looking around the small room in fake terror. "But I paid this house off 20 years ago. It is all I have left." I know, Yvonne sobbed loudly, burying her face in her hands. "It is so unfair. But Desmond has a plan to save you. He has a way to legally protect your estate from the federal agents." Desmond reached into his pocket and pulled out the thick manila envelope. He pulled out the forged conservatorship papers, spreading them across my small coffee table. He smoothed the crisp pages out, pointing to the bottom lines with a shaking finger. "These are protective trusts," Reginald Desmond explained, speaking slowly like he was talking to a small, slow child. "It is a temporary legal shield. If you sign these documents, it transfers the legal title of your assets into a blind family trust. I will manage it for you completely off the books. The government will not be able to touch your pension or your life insurance, and the second the investigation is over, I will transfer everything right back into your name." I stared at the papers, squinting my eyes, pretending I could not read the complex legal jargon. A blind trust. I mumbled, rubbing my forehead as if my brain was hurting. "I do not understand all these big words, Desmond. Are you sure this will keep Kendra safe? Are you sure the government will not take my home? I'm absolutely positive," Desmond promised, his voice dripping with sickening sincerity. "I'm doing this for family Reginald. We have to stick together in times of crisis. Just sign on the dotted lines and I will take these straight to the courthouse before the federal freeze hits your bank accounts." I looked at Yvonne. She was holding her breath, her eyes locked onto the papers with a desperate, starving hunger. I looked at Desmond, seeing the greedy anticipation sweating out of his pores. They actually thought I was a senile, frightened old fool. They thought they had just pulled off the perfect crime. Desmond pulled a sleek silver pen from his pocket. He clicked it and pressed it into my shaking palm. "Here you go, Reginald," he urged softly. "Just your standard signature right next to the red sticky notes." I took the pen. I let it slip through my fingers, dropping it onto the rug. "Oh, I am so sorry," I mumbled, acting clumsy and confused. "My hands do not work like they used to. Could you fetch me a glass of water, Yvonne? My throat is awfully dry from all this fright." Yvonne gritted her teeth but forced a tight smile. "Of course, Reginald," she said sweetly, standing up and rushing into my kitchen. She wanted this over with. She returned seconds later, shoving a glass of tap water into my hand. I took a slow, agonizingly long sip. I set the glass down, missing the coaster on purpose, letting a ring of water form on the wood. I picked the pen back up. Desmond was practically vibrating with impatience. I hovered the pen over the first signature line. The forged medical affidavit claiming my severe dementia. I pressed the ink to the paper. I deliberately made my signature messy, dragging the letters out, making it look exactly like the handwriting of a frail, terrified old man. I signed the power of attorney. I signed the total asset transfer. I signed every single fraudulent document they put in front of me. The second my pen lifted from the final page, Desmond snatched the stack of papers off the table. He did not even try to hide his triumph. The fake grieving posture vanished instantly. He stood up tall, his chest puffing out, a cruel, victorious smirk spreading across his face. "Thank you, Reginald," Desmond said, his voice completely changing, returning to the arrogant, mocking tone from the restaurant. "You have been incredibly helpful today." "Are we done?" I asked, looking up at him with wide, innocent eyes. "Is Terrence safe now?" "Terrence is going to be just fine," Yvonne sneered, not even bothering to look at me. She grabbed her purse and headed straight for the front door. "Come on, Desmond," she snapped. "We have a lot of banking to do before 5:00. Desmond tucked the manila envelope under his arm, looking down at me in my worn-out recliner. "You should get some rest." "Old man," Desmond mocked, turning his back on me. "You look completely exhausted." They walked out of my house, slamming the front door loudly behind them. I listened to their heavy footsteps cross the porch. I heard the car engine start and the tires squeal as they sped away down the quiet suburban street, rushing to claim their stolen prize. I sat alone in the silent living room. I slowly stopped my hand from shaking. I dropped the confused, terrified expression from my face. My posture straightened, the frail illusion washing away completely. I looked up, staring directly into the tiny, hidden camera lens mounted inside the smoke detector above my head. I pulled my burner phone from my pocket and dialed Vance. "We have it all on tape," Boss Vance confirmed immediately, his voice crackling with anticipation over the speaker. The audio is crystal clear. The extortion, the forgery admission, the signatures. It is a locked 4K federal case. "Excellent," I replied, my voice cold and perfectly steady. "Let them try to file the papers at the bank. Let them feel the victory for exactly one night. Tomorrow morning, call the board of directors. Schedule a mandatory emergency executive meeting." I stood up from the recliner, my heavy work boots planted firmly on the floor. I walked over to the coffee table and wiped up the water ring with my sleeve. "Tomorrow," I said quietly to the empty room. "Tomorrow the ghost comes back to life." The morning sun hit the glass exterior of my towering corporate headquarters, reflecting a blinding golden light. Up on the 75th floor, I was already dressed. I was not wearing my faded work jacket today. I wore a custom-tailored charcoal gray suit. It was a suit that commanded absolute respect, a suit I had not worn in years. I stood in the private observation room looking through the one-way mirror down into the massive, sweeping executive boardroom. The annual executive board meeting was underway. The massive mahogany table was surrounded by 20 of the most powerful, ruthless financial minds in the state. Terrence sat at the far end of the table looking incredibly stressed, but holding his ground. He was reviewing the quarterly logistics reports, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous, quiet room. He had no idea that the anonymous owner he feared so much was standing right above him, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Suddenly, the heavy double doors of the boardroom burst open. The loud crash of solid oak hitting the wall made every single executive jump in their expensive leather chairs. Desmond marched into the room, his chest puffed out, radiating a toxic, manic energy. He was flanked by Silas, the greasy, disbarred lawyer from the strip mall. Desmond held the thick manila envelope high in the air, like a triumphant, conquering king. He did not look like a desperate man anymore. He looked like a man who had just discovered the biggest gold mine in the world and held the only key to the vault. Terrence stood up immediately, his face flushing with absolute fury. "Dad!" Terrence shouted, his voice cracking with disbelief. "What are you doing here? Security, get these men out of my boardroom right now." Two large security guards stepped forward, reaching for Desmond's arms, but Silas stepped in front of them, holding up a stack of crisp legal documents. "Do not touch my client, Silas," drawled loudly, his raspy voice cutting through the rising panic in the room. "We are here on official, legally binding business. My client has full overriding authority over this entire corporation." The board members began to murmur, exchanging confused, alarmed glances. Terrence slammed his hands flat on the table. "You are completely insane," Terrence fired back, glaring at his father. "You have zero authority here. This is a closed executive session." Desmond laughed, a loud, booming, arrogant sound. "Oh, Terrence, my poor, naive boy." Desmond mocked, pacing confidently around the edge of the massive table. "You really thought you were running things, did you not? You thought you answered to some mysterious billionaire ghost. But I found out the exact truth this morning when I went to the bank to secure a simple suburban estate." Terrence froze, a look of genuine confusion crossing his face. "What are you talking about?" Terrence demanded. "I'm talking about your precious father-in-law." Desmond sneered, stopping right behind Terrence's chair. "I am talking about Reginald, the old pathetic man in the rusty truck. I took his financial portfolio to the asset management bank, and guess what I found out? He is not a broke laborer. He is the sole, absolute owner of this entire logistics conglomerate." A loud collective chsto echoed around the boardroom. The executives leaned forward, whispering frantically to each other. Terrence looked like he had just been hit by a freight train. He stumbled back a step, his mouth dropping open. Reginald Terrence whispered the pieces violently clicking together in his mind. The freeze, the absolute power. It was him the whole time. Desmond slapped the table hard, demanding the room's attention. "Yes!" Desmond shouted, his eyes wide with greedy madness. "The old man is a secret billionaire." But unfortunately for all of you, the old man has completely lost his mind. Yet he is suffering from severe advanced dementia. He is entirely incapable of managing his own shoelaces, let alone a multi-billion-dollar empire. Silas stepped forward, proudly displaying the forged papers to the stunned board members. And that is why Silas announced with a greasy smile, "My client Desmond here has been granted full, permanent medical conservatorship over Reginald." As of yesterday afternoon, Desmond legally controls every single asset, every single bank account, and every single corporate share that Reginald owns. Desmond looked around the room, drinking in the shocked silence of the powerful executives. He pointed a thick finger directly at Terrence. "You refused to help me yesterday." Desmond hissed, his voice full of cruel vindication. "You chose this company over your own flesh and blood. So now I am taking the company. I am the legal proxy for the sole owner. I am in charge now. And my very first official act is authorizing a massive immediate wire transfer to a private holding account." Terrence stood tall, his shock slowly morphing into a deep protective rage. "You forged those papers," Terrence stated, his voice ringing out loud and clear. "Reginald is sharp as a tack. You manipulated him. You are extorting this company, and I will not let you do it." Desmond stepped right into Terrence, face a vicious snarl, twisting his features. "You do not have a choice, son." Desmond growled low. "The ink is dry. The court stamp is real. If you do not transfer that money right now, I will fire you. I will fire this entire board, and I will liquidate this entire company before lunch. I own the ghost now, and there is absolutely nothing you can do to stop me." Desmond raised his hand, pointing a thick finger at the terrified executives around the table. "I am the sole proxy," Desmond yelled, his voice echoing off the expensive glass walls. "You will transfer those funds right now, or I will dismantle this entire corporate structure by the end of the day." Suddenly, the heavy double doors at the far end of the boardroom swung open with a smooth, silent glide. The loud click of the latch cut through the chaotic noise in the room. Everyone turned their heads. I stepped across the threshold, and the panicked shouting instantly died. I did not shuffle. I did not drag my feet or keep my head bowed. I walked with the straight, unbroken posture of a man who had spent 30 long years building an empire from the dirt up. I wore a custom-tailored charcoal gray suit. The expensive fabric moved silently, perfectly fitting my broad shoulders as I took my first confident steps onto the thick carpet. Vance walked half a step behind me, his eyes scanning the massive room like a hawk looking for prey. Desmond froze completely, his thick finger still pointing uselessly in the air. The cruel, arrogant smirk melted right off his face. He stared at me, his mouth hanging slightly open, his eyes wide with a sudden, freezing terror. The old, frail man from the suburban recliner was entirely gone. The confused, trembling victim he had mocked just yesterday had completely vanished into thin air. Reginald Desmond choked out, his voice dropping into a hoarse, terrified whisper. "What are you doing here? You are supposed to be resting at home." I did not answer him. I did not even look at him. I kept my eyes locked straight ahead, walking the entire length of the massive, polished mahogany table. The powerful board of directors, men and women who moved millions of dollars a single day, instantly stood up from their leather chairs. They did not know my face, but they recognized the absolute, unquestionable authority radiating from every single step I took. They respectfully stepped back, parting like the Red Sea, allowing me to pass without a single word of protest. I reached the far end of the long table. I stopped right next to Terrence. My son-in-law was incredibly pale, his mouth slightly open, staring at me like he was looking at a living ghost. He looked at my expensive, immaculate suit and then up at my calm, sharp eyes. The absolute reality of the situation finally washed over him. "Hello, Terrence," I said quietly, my voice perfectly clear and incredibly steady. "You handled this disruption very well today. You stood your ground against a terrible threat. I am very proud of you." Terrence swallowed hard, slowly nodding his head, finally understanding the massive weight of the secret I had carried for so long. "You really are the owner," Terrence whispered, his voice full of awe and a deep, profound respect. "You are the ghost." I reached out and pulled back the massive, high-backed leather chair at the very head of the boardroom table. It was the chair that had sat completely empty for over 20 years. It was the throne of the anonymous billionaire. I sat down, resting my calloused hands flat on the cool, polished wood. I looked down the length of the table, looking directly at the sweating, trembling mess of a man who was actively trying to steal my life. Desmond took a small, shaky step backward, bumping hard into his greasy lawyer. Silas looked at his client and then at me, the blood completely draining from his face. Silas was a bottom-feeding scam artist, but he was smart enough to recognize a true apex predator when he finally saw one. "This is impossible," Desmond stammered frantically, waving the forged conservatorship papers in the air, his hands shaking violently. "You signed these legal papers, Reginald. You have severe advanced dementia. You did not even know what day it was yesterday afternoon. You drank a glass of tap water and you could not even hold the silver pen straight. The court has already sealed these documents." I leaned forward in the massive chair, steepling my fingers together. I let a long, heavy, suffocating silence fill the boardroom, letting Desmond drown in his own panic. I looked at the pathetic, desperate man who had tried to destroy my family for a quick payday. "I do not have dementia, Desmond," I stated, my voice echoing off the glass walls, cold and sharp as a diamond cutting glass. "My mind is sharper today than it was 30 years ago when your thieving brother Calvin tried to pull a very similar pathetic trick on me. I know exactly what day it is. It is the day that you finally pay for every single lie you have ever told." Desmond shook his head violently, refusing to accept the terrifying reality crashing down on him. "No," he yelled, his voice cracking with pure, unadulterated panic. "The signature on these forms is real. I watched you sign the papers with my own 2 eyes. You surrendered the estate to me. I am the legal conservator. I am in charge." I turned my head slightly, looking at my lead investigator standing faithfully behind my chair. "Vance," I said smoothly, not taking my eyes off Desmond. "Please explain the concept of a honey trap to our extremely uninvited guests." Vance stepped forward, pulling a small, sleek tablet from his jacket pocket. He tapped the glowing screen exactly once. The massive high-definition projector at the end of the boardroom hummed to life with a low vibration. The giant white screen rolled down from the ceiling, completely dwarfing Desmond and his terrified lawyer. A crisp, clear video began to play on the massive screen. It was my modest suburban living room. The camera angle was high, looking down directly from the hidden smoke detector. The 4K footage showed Desmond on his knees on my cheap rug, aggressively shoving the forged documents into my face. The audio piped through the expensive surround sound boardroom speakers, loud and crystal clear. "We just have to step over one old man to do it." Yvonne's voice echoed from the massive speakers, playing a secret recording from the hot parking lot right outside the lawyer's office. The entire board of directors gasped loudly, staring at the giant screen in absolute horror. They watched the recorded Desmond gloat wickedly over my trembling fake performance. They heard him explicitly detail his extortion plan and his malicious intention to drain my completely healthy estate. Desmond opened his hands. He dropped the thick manila envelope. The forged legal papers scattered wildly across the expensive corporate carpet, completely worthless. He looked at the giant screen and then back at me, his entire body shaking uncontrollably. The clever trap he thought he had so perfectly set had just snapped completely shut, wrapping a tight chain around his own neck. The video on the massive screen faded to black, leaving the boardroom in absolute stunned silence. I looked at the 20 powerful executives who were still staring at the empty screen. "Sit down," I instructed them gently. They immediately dropped back into their expensive leather chairs, not making a single sound. I turned my attention back to Desmond. He was breathing heavily, his chest heaving under his cheap, wrinkled shirt. Silas, the greasy lawyer, was already inching toward the heavy double doors, trying to quietly escape the room. "Vance," I said smoothly, not taking my eyes off my terrified in-law. "Stop the lawyer." Vance stepped sideways, easily, blocking the exit with his broad shoulders. Silas froze, raising his hands in a pathetic surrender. "You came to my family dinner." I began, my voice carrying the heavy weight of 30 years of patience. "You brought a cream-colored envelope full of forged papers claiming I destroyed your brother Calvin. You demanded $2 million to keep quiet, but you did not know that I still have the original certified bank records from 1991. I nodded to Vance. He opened his black leather briefcase, pulling out a thick, bound dossier. He tossed it onto the polished mahogany table. It slid all the way down, stopping right in front of Terrence. "Look at it, Terrence," I commanded softly. Terrence opened the heavy dossier. The pages are original wire transfers and signed confessions from Calvin's own accountant, I explained to the silent room. Calvin was embezzling from our joint venture. I gave him a choice to walk away clean or go to federal prison. He chose to walk away, and then he spent the rest of his life lying to his family about it. Desmond shook his head weakly. "No," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Calvin was a good man. You stole everything from him." I ignored his pathetic denial. "But the real reason you are here today—" "Desmond," I continued, leaning forward in my massive chair, "is not about family honor. It is about your own greedy, destructive gambling habits." Vance pulled a second folder from his briefcase, dropping it onto the table. This one was bright red. "You owe $7 million to a violent criminal syndicate in Savannah," I announced loudly, letting the massive number hang in the cold boardroom air. "You squandered your fake wealth on illegal sports books and underground tables. You brought the mob right to the doorstep of my daughter and my son-in-law. You tried to extort me to pay off killers. And when Terrence refused to embezzle corporate funds for you, you plotted to declare me mentally incompetent and steal my suburban house." The board of directors murmured in disgust. Terrence looked at his father, his eyes filled with a mixture of profound sorrow and absolute revulsion. "You asked me to steal for you?" Terrence whispered, shaking his head. "You tried to ruin my wife's father to save your own skin. You sicken me, Dad." Desmond fell to his knees on the thick corporate carpet. He looked up at me, tears streaming down his face, the arrogant facade completely shattered into a million pieces. "Please, Reginald." He sobbed loudly, his hands clasped together in front of his chest. "Please, they are going to kill me. They gave me 48 hours. If I do not pay them by tomorrow, they are going to come for me. I'm begging you as family, please help me." I looked down at the broken man, feeling absolutely no pity in my heart. "You stopped being family, Desmond, the second you threatened my daughter," I said coldly. "And you do not need to worry about the Savannah Syndicate anymore. They will not be able to reach you where you are going." I raised my right hand, giving Vance the final signal. Vance reached into his jacket, pulling out a small radio. "Bring them in." Vance spoke quietly into the microphone. The heavy boardroom doors swung open violently for the second time. 6 plainclothes detectives from the Atlanta Police Department Major Fraud Division stormed into the room. Their badges hung from silver chains around their necks. Desmond, the lead detective, barked, stepping over the scattered forged documents on the floor. "You are under arrest for felony extortion wire fraud and conspiracy to commit elder abuse." 2 heavy-set detectives hauled Desmond off the floor, twisting his arms behind his back. The sharp metallic click of steel handcuffs echoed loudly in the quiet boardroom. Desmond did not fight them. He went completely limp, sobbing uncontrollably, his head hanging low between his shoulders. Another detective grabbed Silas, slamming him hard against the glass wall and cuffing him instantly. "You have the right to remain silent." The detective read the rights loudly, patting the greasy lawyer down for weapons. "I suggest you use it, counselor." "Wait!" Desmond cried out, twisting his neck to look back at Terrence as the detectives dragged him toward the door. "Terrence, please, you have to get me a good lawyer. You cannot let them take me to county jail. Please, son." Terrence stood up from his chair. He straightened his tie, looking at his father with cold, dead eyes. "I do not know you," Terrence said firmly. The detectives pulled Desmond through the double doors, his pathetic wails echoing down the long marble hallway until the heavy oak doors finally swung shut, cutting the sound off completely. The boardroom was dead silent again. I looked around the massive table at the 20 powerful executives who were still processing the absolute destruction they had just witnessed. I stood up from my chair, buttoning my charcoal gray suit jacket. "Gentlemen," I said calmly, my voice projecting absolute authority. "The disruption has been handled. Terrence is still your chief executive officer. You will continue to report to him, and he will continue to report to me. If anyone has a problem with the way my family handles business, you are welcome to leave your security badge on the table and walk out the door right now." Nobody moved a single inch. Nobody even breathed loudly. "Excellent." I nodded, turning toward the door. "Terrence, you may resume your quarterly logistics report." I walked out of the boardroom, leaving the ghost behind and stepping back into the light. It has been exactly 3 months since the heavy boardroom doors swung shut on Desmond. The justice system moves slowly, but when it finally catches up to a man, it crushes him completely. Desmond is currently sitting in a cold, damp cell inside the Fulton County Jail. He does not wear tailored silk shirts anymore. He wears a scratchy, bright orange jumpsuit that smells like industrial bleach and stale sweat. The man who used to order vintage champagne without even looking at the price now waits in a long line just to get a tray of watery oatmeal. His massive, multi-million-dollar bail was firmly denied. The federal prosecutors looked at the mountain of evidence, including the 4K video from my living room and the detailed financial records of his illegal gambling debts. They stood before a judge and labeled him an extreme flight risk. But Desmond knows the real truth. He knows that the cold, concrete walls of the county jail are the only things keeping him alive right now. The criminal syndicate in Savannah is still waiting for their $7 million. They know exactly where he's locked up. Desmond spends every single night lying awake on a thin plastic mattress. He stares at the dark shadows on the ceiling, terrified that one of the night guards might be on the syndicate payroll. Every time the heavy steel doors bang shut, he flinches. He built a trap for me, but he ended up locking himself inside a cage of pure, suffocating paranoia. The illusion of his generational wealth was completely shattered, and the blast radius took down his wife right along with him. Yvonne did not go to jail because she kept her signature off the forged legal documents. But the civil courts stripped her of absolutely everything else. The corporate holding companies that seized the Buckhead mansion, the luxury cars, and every single piece of expensive jewelry she had bought with stolen money. Her elite upper-crust social circle dropped her instantly. The women she used to gossip with at the exclusive country club blocked her phone number and pretended she simply did not exist. To survive the crushing mountain of legal fees, Yvonne had to do the one thing she had always mocked other people for doing. She had to get a real manual labor job. I drove my rusty truck past a massive discount retail store just last week. I parked at the far end of the crowded asphalt lot and walked inside. I did not go there to gloat, but I needed to see the final piece of the domino chain fall firmly into place. I walked down the brightly lit aisles, surrounded by cheap plastic goods and blaring overhead announcements. I found Yvonne standing behind a metal cash register in lane number 4. The woman who used to complain about the temperature of her imported lobster was now wearing a stiff blue polyester vest over a faded white shirt. Her perfectly manicured nails were chipped and broken from tearing open heavy cardboard boxes all day long. Her expensive blonde highlights had completely grown out, revealing wide strips of dull gray hair. She looked exhausted, her shoulders slumped, her face completely drained of that cruel, arrogant pride. I stood behind a tall display of paper towels, watching her ring up a customer. The customer was an older woman paying with a handful of loose coins. Yvonne sighed loudly, a bitter, impatient sound, but she counted the coins anyway. She had to. If her drawer was short at the end of her grueling 8-hour shift, the store manager would write her up and dock her miserable pay. Suddenly, a woman in a designer dress pushed a shopping cart into Yvonne's lane. It was Susan, the very same country club president who had publicly revoked Yvonne's membership months ago. Susan looked up from her expensive smartphone and made direct eye contact with Yvonne. I watched Yvonne's face drop, turning a sickly shade of white. She froze, completely humiliated, trapped behind the cheap metal register. Susan did not say hello. Susan did not even smile. She simply looked at Yvonne's cheap blue vest, let out a soft, mocking laugh, and moved her cart to a different lane, leaving Yvonne standing there in absolute crushing shame. It is a harsh reality when the fake pedestal you stand on is violently kicked out from under your feet. Yvonne used to look down on the working class, calling us blue-collar nobodies. Now she was clocking in at 6 a.m, taking orders from a manager half her age, just to afford a tiny one-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood she used to drive past with her doors locked. I did not walk up to her register. I did not need to say a single word to her. The absolute silence of her new life was a much better teacher than anything I could ever say. I turned around and walked back out the sliding glass doors, stepping into the warm Atlanta sunshine. I felt a quiet, settled peace in my chest. The ancient debt with Calvin was finally closed, and his greedy, malicious brother had been completely neutralized. They had tried to steal an empire, but they could not even handle the weight of their own terrible choices. The bell above the glass door chimed a bright, cheerful sound as I walked into the old diner on the south side of town. The air inside was thick, smelling of fried bacon, strong black coffee, and sweet cherry pie. The floors were checkered linoleum worn down by decades of heavy work boots and tired waitresses. It was not a place with valet parking or imported marble tables. It was a place where honest people came to eat honest food after a long day of breaking their backs. I slid into a red vinyl booth in the back corner, the seat squeaking slightly under my weight. I was wearing my faded canvas work jacket again, the charcoal gray suit safely hung back up in the dark closet where it belonged. A few minutes later, the door chimed again. Terrence walked in wearing a crisp white dress shirt with his tie pulled loose and his sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He looked around the diner, his eyes adjusting to the dim fluorescent lights until he spotted me in the corner. He walked over and slid into the booth across from me. He looked tired, but the heavy, suffocating weight that had been sitting on his shoulders for the last 3 months was completely gone. He breathed out a long, slow sigh, resting his arms on the sticky Formica table. The waitress, an older woman named Betty, walked over with a steaming glass pot of coffee. 2 blacks and 2 slices of the cherry I ordered for us, giving her a warm smile. She nodded, filling our thick ceramic mugs and walking away without a single word. Terrence wrapped his hands around his hot mug, staring down into the dark liquid. The final legal paperwork cleared this morning. Reginald Terrence said softly, breaking the quiet silence of our booth. The federal prosecutors officially seized the rest of Desmond's hidden offshore accounts. The Savannah Syndicate got tipped off about a massive police raid and completely scattered. My father is going to be sitting in that county cell for a very long time. I took a slow sip of my coffee, the bitter hot liquid waking me up. You did the right thing, Terrence, I told him, looking him directly in his tired eyes. You faced a terrible choice in that glass office. You had to choose between the blood of a corrupt father and the integrity of a company you thought you did not own. A lot of good men would have folded under that kind of intense pressure. A lot of smart men would have justified stealing that money just to keep the peace. But you stood your ground. You protected my daughter, and you protected the legacy of this family without even knowing it was yours to protect. Terrence looked up, a look of deep, profound respect crossing his face. I was just doing my job, Reginald. Terrence replied humbly, I could not let him destroy what you built. But I still cannot believe that you built all of this. You own half the commercial real estate in the city, and you still drive a rusty truck with a cracked mirror. I chuckled, a deep rumbling sound in my chest. Betty returned, sliding 2 heavy plates of warm cherry pie onto the table along with 2 cheap metal forks. I picked up my fork and cut into the sweet, flaky crust. The truck reminds me of exactly where I started, I explained, pointing my fork at him. When I started this logistics company 30 years ago, I did not have a corner office. I drove the heavy routes myself. I loaded the heavy crates in the pouring rain, and I slept in the freezing cab of my truck when I could not afford a cheap motel room. Wealth is not a costume you wear, Terrence. It is a tool. You use it to build things, and you use it to protect the people you love. Desmond thought wealth was a golden crown that made him better than everyone else. And because he wore it proudly on his head for the whole world to see, it made him a massive walking target. Terrence took a bite of his pie, chewing slowly, letting my words sink in. He nodded, completely understanding the heavy lesson that his father had tragically failed to learn. So what happens now? Terrence asked, setting his fork down on the table. Do I still report to you on the 75th floor? Do we keep the powerful ghost alive? I reached into the inner pocket of my canvas jacket. I pulled out a thick legal document folded neatly in half. It was not a forged conservatorship or a pathetic blackmail threat. It was a certified, irrevocable transfer of total operational control. I placed it gently on the sticky formica table right next to his plate of pie. I am officially retiring, Terrence. I announced, a profound sense of relief washing over my entire body. I've spent 3 decades fighting in the dirt building walls and burying poisonous snakes. I'm tired. I want to spend my remaining days watching my tomatoes grow and waiting for my beautiful daughter to give me some grandchildren to spoil. Terrence stared at the legal document, his eyes going wide with shock. He reached out with a trembling hand, lightly touching the thick paper. Reginald, he whispered, his voice catching in his throat. This is the entire empire. This is the whole conglomerate. Are you absolutely sure that I'm ready for this kind of power? I leaned back in the red vinyl booth, crossing my arms over my chest. I have never been more sure of anything in my entire life, I told him proudly. You are a brilliant CEO, Terrence, but more importantly, you are a remarkably good man. You earned this seat not by marrying my daughter and not by carrying my last name. You earned it because when the devil walked into your office and offered you an easy way out, you looked him dead in the eye and told him no. Terrence picked up the document, holding it with the absolute reverence it deserved. Thank you, Reginald, he said, a single tear escaping his eye, rolling down his cheek. I will not let you down. I promise you that. I know you will not, son, I replied, finishing the last bite of my cherry pie. Now eat up. You have a multi-billion-dollar company to run tomorrow morning, and you cannot do it on an empty stomach. We finished our pie in a comfortable, easy silence. I left a crisp $20 bill on the table for Betty, making sure she saw it before we walked out the glass doors. The hot Atlanta sun was high in the sky, baking the cracked asphalt of the diner parking lot. Terrence walked over to his modest corporate leased sedan, clutching the transfer documents tightly to his chest. He turned back and gave me a firm, deeply respectful nod before climbing into his car and driving off toward the towering glass skyline. I walked over to my rusty 2006 truck. I patted the hot, dented hood, feeling the solid metal beneath my calloused hands. I climbed inside the worn leather seat, welcoming me like an old friend. I turned the key, the heavy engine roaring to life with a loud, reliable growl. I put the truck in gear and drove away from the bustling city, heading back toward the quiet, peaceful suburbs. I pulled into my small driveway, parking right next to my garden. The tomato plants were tall and heavy with bright red fruit. I stepped out of the truck, taking a deep breath of the fresh, clean air. The world was finally quiet. The massive empire was in safe, loyal hands, and the arrogant enemies who had tried to steal my peace were locked away in the dark. I picked up my green watering can, filled it from the garden hose, and got back to honest work. Some men spend their entire lives chasing a fake, shiny crown, but they never realize that the absolute best revenge is simply living a quiet, beautiful life while your enemies watch from a cold, unforgiving cage. True wealth is never found in the clothes you wear or the cars you drive, but in the quiet integrity of your actions. Those who weaponize deceit to steal from the humble will eventually build the very cages that lock them away. Respect the quiet ones.